Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. My name is Kristen, this is Intentional Living, and welcome to my wedding series here on my channel where I talk about all things wedding planning, and I'm gonna talk to you today about budgeting. So this is the one that I feel like most people have been waiting for, is talking about how to budget for a wedding, because I am primarily a budget channel here on YouTube, and so I have been very excited to talk about this topic with y'all today. So today's video specifically is talking about getting started with a budget, and so this is not going to be the only budget video I do for wedding planning. So if you want to see future videos, hit subscribe and join me on my channel. You can always just filter by wedding series videos on my playlist and you'll be notified when new videos come up. I am posting 3 days a week now with a mix of wedding and budgeting videos, and so join our channel and you'll never miss one. So I know a lot of people get overwhelmed with budgeting for their own lives, let alone a big event. And I do event planning in my full-time job and I do budgeting in my part-time job, and so I feel especially qualified to talk with y'all today about event planning, budgeting, and today we're talking about specifically wedding budgeting because I'm planning my wedding. If you missed my last video, I talked all about my proposal, my engagement, how I met my fiance, and what first steps we took in getting prepared to plan a wedding. I'm in the midst of planning our wedding. It is currently, when I'm filming this, October of 2024, and we get married in June of 2025. And so today I'm going to be talking to you about the budget that we made to get started. I'm not going to be sharing specific numbers because we are contributing to the budget for our wedding, but also my parents are and his family is, and they didn't sign up for budget transparency on this channel. So I'll be as transparent with y'all as possible about what we are personally putting towards parts of the wedding, but I'm not going to be, kind of putting our parents' business out on the internet. So, but what I am going to talk to y'all about is the steps I took to prepare my budget and to create as close to an accurate budget as possible, and all the questions and things that I think you should be thinking about if you're creating a budget for your wedding, or maybe you're not yet married and you might bookmark this video and come back to it in the future, but just things to get you thinking about how to create an initial budget, which is really the first step in wedding planning. So you can definitely think about where and when you want to get married, but you can't take a lot of action on wedding planning until you have a budget. So we are starting with the basics. We are starting here today because this is really what you need to do before you should book anything at all for your wedding or set anything in stone. Okay, so my first step for you all, and the first step that I took, was to answer a few questions. So I have 4 questions that I think you definitely need to answer before we move forward into step 2. So the first question is, who is contributing financially to the wedding? Is it just you and your fiance? Are parents involved? Is there a grandmother involved? Of your entire family and friends and everyone is contributing financially to paying to host your wedding. And so you need an answer to that question. You need to know who is involved. 1A to that is, how much are they contributing? So I know it can be uncomfortable to have conversations around money with family and friends, but something that I did was just kind of talk to my parents and be like, hey, can we set up a meeting sometime, like jump on Zoom, because they are not local, where we can talk generally about the wedding and budget and finances, because that would really help me before I can move forward in the wedding planning process to kind of have that conversation with y'all. So then we got on a call. They knew about it in advance, so they came prepared with, what they thought they could financially contribute. We obviously shared at the beginning of that call that we don't expect them to contribute at all, but if they do, that's great. We just would like to know how much by a certain date so that we could start planning. And so we kind of went back and forth with my parents as they were, thinking about what they could contribute. We also talked about kind of roles in the wedding planning process and had some of those initial conversations up front. We also did the same thing with Colin's family because they had expressed really early on that they wanted to help with the wedding or parts of the wedding, and so we had that conversation with them as well. So we found out that both sets of our parents did want to contribute, and they told us a dollar amount each. And then Colin and I sat down also and thought about how much we would be willing to contribute and what we thought we could reasonably save in time for the wedding. And that gave us, our total number that we were working with. So the second question is, how much are you financially contributing, or are you contributing to the wedding? So in some families, I know only the bride's parents financially contribute to the wedding. Sometimes it's the groom's family pays for the rehearsal and the bride's family pays for the reception and whatnot. So a question to ask is, are you and your fiance contributing? And if so, how much? Because we're a budgeting channel, I would be irresponsible to not share this part. So think about this in two-part for how much you can contribute. How much do you have available to you today in savings? And then how much can you realistically contribute based on how many paychecks you have between now and the wedding? So what I did was think through how many paychecks both Colin and I had, how much conservatively we thought we could save from each paycheck. And then I added that dollar amount up, added it to what we already had in our wedding savings. And that is the total amount that I thought we could reasonably contribute to our wedding if needed. So that's step one, answer those questions. So step two is pretty obvious, but know your overall budget. So add all those numbers together, and that is what you should tell yourself is the maximum amount of money you have to work with. And so that is your hard ceiling. That is your budget. So use that number for the future steps we're going to talk about. So the next step to building your budget is to start to get quotes. And so for getting quotes, I find it best to be strategic with it. So think of your biggest money spenders. So to me, I started with venues because I knew the venue was going to dictate a lot in the budget, because some venues include ceremony and reception. Some venues are only reception. Some venues have tables and chairs, so you don't need to rent any. Some don't, so you do have to rent some. And so I think starting with the venue makes a lot of sense because it's a large chunk of the budget and impacts a lot of the other questions. So for venues, you need to think about your ceremony, your reception, and then eventually, and if this is all part of the same budget or a different budget is kind of up to you and your situation. But for me, I also needed to think about our rehearsal dinner venue and our welcome party venue, because we did want to host a welcome party for all of our guests. So I had the potential for 4 different venues between those activities, between those different parts of the wedding. And so getting venue quotes was super important for me. And tied up with that is also catering. So a lot of times the most expensive parts of wedding are your venue and your food and like bar package. And so caterers are also really important to get quotes for. Most of my venues I looked at had food on site, like they have their own chefs and you have to use their catering. So that helped a lot, specifically for the reception. But if you are looking at venues that you have to bring in catering, I would really recommend sending out some emails to some caterers that are recommended in that area. You can use Wedding Wire or The Knot, or if there's a wedding association in your area. So like for us, there's an OBX, Outer Banks Wedding Association. So we use that of just like who belongs to the wedding association. We send off a bunch of emails. And so then you can get generally like cost per head. Like generally a plated meal is, $120 per head. A buffet meal is like $80 per head. And you can kind of cost compare with other caterers, get a general average of what the food is going to cost, and you'll want that for your initial budget. So we're not making decisions at this point, we're just getting quotes. The third thing I would recommend you get quotes for are bar and bartenders. If that's not included in catering, reach out to bartending services. For us, our venue included catering and bar, but I just needed to select different packages to get a price list for each. So I'll talk more about that in my venue video, which will be my next video that I'm posting. But if those things are all separate, so if catering does not include wine, beer, cocktail, you need to reach out to caterers as well. And if your venue does not include catering, you need to reach out to caterers. So in this step, you just start getting quotes, you keep a spreadsheet, and you just track generally what these things are costing in the area that you're wanting to get married in, and that will be a great tool for your initial budget. We'll talk about how we're going to pull all this together at the end. Okay, so step 4 is about asking questions of the venues that you're looking at. So while you're getting quotes, after you've gotten quotes, you can kind of determine, maybe there's some venues that are like so far out of your budget that you're like, okay, we can scratch them off the list. But for the venues you're serious about or the venues that you like, there are some questions that you'll want to ask to be able to set up your initial budget. The first one is what's included in that price. So how many hours does that include? So for ours, it only included a reception for 5 hours. We wanted a 6-hour reception. So we had to ask what the additional cost was for a 6th hour, and they gave us that amount. And so that was important for our budget because we did not want a 5-hour reception. We wanted to go from 5 to 11, not 5 to 10. So what's included? How many hours? That's one of them. Rentals. Does it include chairs, for example? If it's a ceremony venue, do they have places for people to sit? Do they have an arch that you can use? Do they have a sound system. There's so many different questions, and we'll talk about this also in the venue video of just all the different questions you should ask. But to get pricing, just make sure you know, okay, this is how much the venue costs and here's what's included. Because when you're cost comparing, some venues are gonna seem way cheaper, but then when you realize that they don't include all those things, you need to do the math to compare if it's actually cheaper or if it just is cheaper because it offers nothing with it. You also wanna know if it comes with a venue coordinator. So if your venue has someone that like will work with you with, you know, creating diagrams and setups, or is it just like, you have the space, good luck? Because that might impact whether or not you want a wedding planner and things like that. Another question to ask your venue is, do they have vendor lists? So either way, this is a great question. Some venues have required vendors that you have to use. So for example, catering, bartending, or lighting people or sound people, things like that, that you have to use because they have existing relationships with them. Or they might just have a preferred vendor list, which is people they've worked with before that are reputable, that they can recommend, that they prefer that you work with because they already have existing relationships. And the reason you want to get that list is because then you can contact any of them to get quotes on other things as you're building out your budget, which we'll get to. And then the last, maybe not the last question, but the last big question that you should ask your venue is, what are their taxes and fees on everything? So you would be astonished by how many fees are involved when you're booking a venue. So they might be like, okay, it's $3,000 to rent the space, but by the time you get the final invoice, it's like $5,000 and you're like, what the heck? Well, there's all these different fees based on how big your group is, or the taxes alone will add a significant amount. So just make sure you get a full picture of like what this actually costs and not just be like, oh, they said it was $3,000, let me put that in my budget, because that's not going to be accurate. And you don't want to book something and then realize that it was thousands of dollars more than you thought. Okay, so those are some general questions to ask the venue. If you want a more detailed list, we'll talk about that in my next video, so be sure to watch that. Step number 5 is to ask some questions of your caterer. So you maybe have gotten an initial idea of how much things cost from that caterer, but here's some more specific questions that you should ask. The first one is going to be a breakdown between buffet and plated. So the buffet meals are generally cheaper than plated meals because there's less service required. For plated meals, they need more waiters and people to actually bring out the food in waves, versus a buffet. People are picking up their plates and going, and so they're doing some of that service. So if you're trying to save money, a buffet is probably your better bet. And for buffets, if you want like to elevate it, there's often like different stations that you can add, like carving stations, or you know, maybe a DIY mac and cheese bar, things like that, that you can kind of add on to make it more of a thing. And so make sure you're looking at the price difference between those. You also want to make sure to ask for a price list for appetizers. So if you plan to do any type of cocktail hour, you're going to want appetizers. People get hungry after the ceremony while they're waiting for the reception. So be sure to make sure you ask for their appetizer list and get general price list of what that looks like. And then you also want to ask for dessert fees, or how much desserts cost if you're planning to do desserts through your caterer, or if you're planning to use an external cake person, that's a different thing. But also see if they have a cake cutting fee or any other like service fees for serving desserts that they didn't make. That's a good question to ask because sometimes they will literally charge you just to cut the cake. So be aware. Step number 6 is questions to ask your bar or bartender service if you are doing that. I didn't have to do this because this was included in my venue and my catering, but they were questions I asked generally about the bar. So something you want to think about is ask about like, okay, based on how big my wedding is, how many bartenders do I need? So, you know, you might say like, okay, up to 50 people, you need 1 bartender, up to 100 people, you need 2, up to 150, you need 3, and that will adjust the price. So you want to know kind of what those ranges are for your own budget and to help you with our next step, which is to think about your guest count. You also want to ask for a price list for different packages for the bar. So there's lots of different things you can do for your bar at your wedding. You can do a cash bar where the guests pay their own way. You could do a beer and wine only bar where it's free to your guests, but you're only serving beer and wine, which is generally like the cheaper of the open bar packages. You could do like a limited supply bar. So it's once we hit this number of drinks, it becomes a cash only bar. So that probably has a different price structure. They also will likely have some sort of basic package for an open bar where it's unlimited drinks for guests, but it's maybe your more basic beer, wine, liquor, or your top shelf, which is nicer beer, wine, and liquor. So Ask for a breakdown for all of it so you can compare your options and also give you more details of what you may or may not want to pay for. Also, some venues will allow you to bring your own booze if you pay for a bartender service. You could also price that out, and there's a lot of online calculators of how much booze to buy based on how big your party is. And if you just go to Costco and like get up all your booze and then pay for a bartender, you could also price out what that would cost you in comparison to like a cash bar or an open bar. And then the last question I would ask is if you're interested in having a champagne toast, for example, at your reception, or if you're wanting to have like wine service during dinner, ask if those have additional costs, because that can really impact your budget and whether you can or can't afford those things. So go ahead and ask for what that costs if you're interested in it. I don't think I'm doing either, so I didn't ask those questions. But I've seen a lot of weddings where they have a glass of champagne waiting for everyone, which I think is fun. And I've seen weddings where they come around and serve you red or white wine throughout dinner, and that just generally has a fee with it because it's more service. Okay, so on to step 7, which you could have done earlier. It's really personal preference. I liked to get the budget questions out of the way to some of the vendors before I think about guest count, but step 7 is to think about your guest count. You can do this first. If you already know, like, we are gonna have 100 people, great. For me, I wanted to get the numbers from vendors before I decided on the ultimate like goal guest count, because I wanted to know what I could afford, right? So I didn't want to be like, oh, I want to do 150 people and then get to the end and realize I can't afford 150 people. So I decided to kind of do it the other way, but it's up to you. You could move this to step 3 if you wanted. I'm leaving it at step 7, but you want to think about how many people you want to have at your wedding. So the easiest way to do this is to make an initial guest list and just kind of like word vomit everything onto a spreadsheet of who from your family, your fiance's family, your family friends, your fiance's family friends, your mutual friends, your individual friends from like different stages of your life, and just put it all on a spreadsheet. Ask your fiance to look it over and contribute it, and then also ask your families to look over it and contribute to it. Make sure you're not missing anyone. Just throw everyone's name on it. And then look at your budget and see, okay, we can afford 150 people. And now see how many people are on your guest list. If there's only 100 people on your guest list, great. Then maybe you can go for a higher bar package, or you could maybe do a plated instead of a buffet dinner, and you can start making those choices. So I find it helpful to know what your parameters are and then, you know, kind of word vomit your guest list and then tailor it based on the two together of like, who are the people we could cut from the list, and then what decisions do we want to make. Like if a plated dinner is really that important to you that you'd rather cut guests to have a plated dinner, then great. But one of the easiest ways to save money on a wedding is to have less people and to go cheaper on food and beverage. So it's up to you to kind of make those choices. I know for me, it was really important to have a plated dinner. And so I knew that I might need to sacrifice some guest list numbers to be able to afford a plated dinner, because I just wanted plated rather than buffet. But your guest count is the easiest way to save money, because with less guests, it's less chairs, it's less tables, it's less favors, it's less food, it's less wine, it's less beer. It's the easiest way to save money. So when in doubt, you can always start small with your guest list and add on people if your budget allows. Okay, so the next step for creating your initial budget for your wedding is to think about your priorities. So sit down with your fiance and think through your priorities and get quotes for those things. So for example, photo and video were a huge priority for me. So I told my fiance, I'm like, we are not gonna save money on photo video. I will save money on other things. I will DIY every centerpiece for our wedding, but I want professional photography, I want professional videography, and I want it for the whole weekend. So I want it at the rehearsal dinner, I want it at the welcome party, I want it at the ceremony, I want it at the reception, I want it getting ready. Like that is, like, for me, that was my number one. Really, even over the venue, that was my number one. So we had that conversation, and then I was like, what are your priorities? And his number one was music. He was like, I really want a band. I really want to be able to afford a band. So we decided to put our money into photo, video, music, and the venue. And then we decided that we'd be willing to adjust on food, alcohol, so like not needing to do top shelf bar package, not needing to do like the most expensive entree. We'd rather pull back there and have the photo, video, band in the venue that we want. So those were our priorities. Florals were not a priority for me. So I was like, the least amount of cheapest florals that we get is great. Like, I am not going to do a lot of flowers at the wedding. So that was really low on my list. So I did reach out and get some quotes for florals, but I kind of got like a bare bones floral budget of like the bouquets, the boutonnieres, some centerpieces, and some for the ceremony that we could repurpose at the reception, and that was kind of it. But music was really important, so we definitely reached out to bands to get quotes to see what it would cost to have a band before we put our initial budget together. Some other priorities that you might have, I've had friends that really wanted upgraded design or rentals. So, you know, maybe your venue comes with silverware and you really want gold, like that's gonna cost different money. If you really want upgraded chairs or upgraded linens, that's gonna cost extra money. And for me, that was not important because I knew I could DIY things. But if that is important, this is the stage I'd recommend getting some quotes on that, just to have something to kind of use in your initial budget. Something else that might be a priority is just like miscellaneous entertainment. So some people really want a photo booth at their reception. We didn't really care, so we didn't reach out for a quote for a photo booth. Like if we could afford it and there was room, cool. If not, like we're not gonna do it. But that might be really important to you, so you'd want to get a quote for that. If you know, want to do an ice cream truck at the end of your reception, you might want to get a quote for that. So if there are those touches, those entertainment pieces for your guests that you really want, now would be the time to get an initial quote just to see what it costs, so that way you can plug it into your initial budget. And then one more thing you might want to think about, especially like something I had to think about with this being a destination wedding, is to think about lodging and transportation costs. So for us, what is it going to cost to get to this place, to stay at this place, and that needs to be part of the budget. Where are you housing people? Where are people sleeping? Where are you sleeping? And just making sure that that's part of the budget if that is something that you're paying for. So for us, we obviously need to pay for where Colin and I are staying, and we also wanted to kind of offset the cost of lodging for our wedding party, so we had to do a bunch of research on what that was going to cost in our destination. So think about what your priorities are outside of food, beverage, venue, and get some quotes for your budget. And then the last step is to create a budget. So all of that was kind of research, and now we get to like put it into a spreadsheet and make a budget. And this is going to be based on your quotes, based on your location, based on your priorities. So don't use numbers that other people have. You can to get started. So something I did is my brother had a wedding in kind of a similar destination. And so I did ask if he'd be willing to share his budget with me, and he did say yes. And we did use those numbers initially to kind of give us some placeholders. But I found out, you know, he got married 5 years ago and prices have increased because of general inflation and post-COVID and all the things. And so my prices were a lot higher than his. And he got married in a location that was, you know, maybe just slightly cheaper than the location I'm getting married in. So while it was a helpful stepping stone, it was not one-to-one. Like I could not use his budget as a perfect replacement. I'd also spoken with friends of like, you know, how much did you pay for your wedding dress? Just to kind of put in, you know, a placeholder for myself. And that is helpful to get started. But if you know, your friend thrifted their wedding dress and you want to get a really glamorous one, you should adjust your budget accordingly. But it can be helpful to kind of benchmark based off of what other people are doing. And I really wish I could share my budget with you for that purpose, just to be a benchmark. But I just don't feel comfortable doing that when not everyone signed up to be on YouTube. I'm happy to answer questions like in my DMs though. So if you want to DM me on Instagram, if you have a specific question, I'm happy to respond there. Based on your quotes that you received, based on the priorities of you and your fiance and your families, you want to start building a budget, which will be adjusted as you start booking things, but just to give you a good base and basic knowledge of like what you are starting with and what you're working with and what you can and can't afford. So once you create this basic budget, we're going to talk more about what that looks like. You're going to want to run it by people who are involved. So anyone who's contributing financially, share their part with them. So for example, Colin's family is paying for or contributing towards, not paying entirely for, but contributing towards our rehearsal and our welcome party. So we have a separate like spreadsheet budget just for the rehearsal dinner and the welcome party. And that budget we went through and created kind of an initial one, and we did like kind of run through the different elements with his family and see, are we forgetting anything? Like, are these all the vendors we're thinking? And that was helpful. And then for the ceremony and the reception, my parents are paying for most of that, and then we are contributing a little bit too. And so we went through it and kind of did the same thing. And then Colin and I have our own budget for things that we're paying for. So like things for our wedding party, our bachelorette parties, things like that, like our own outfits and different things and decor and DIYs that we want to do. So we kind of did the same thing. So just make sure other people's eyeballs get on it to see if you've missed anything. And then I would really recommend having a large line item in each of your budgets for TBD things. So it really depends on how big your budget is, but take a percentage of your budget and put it as like miscellaneous, because you don't know what's going to pop up. There might be prices that you got that were 2024 prices and you're getting married in 2025 and they go up, and maybe you forgot about transportation and you do need to book a bus to transport people to your wedding. Like, you want to have money at your disposal for those things that you forget or that you didn't take into account a year before you got married. So please, please, please have a large miscellaneous section, because things do and will pop up. Okay, so what things should be in your budget? Well, I created a budget template spreadsheet for you. If you want to check it out, it'll be linked down below. It'll take you to my Etsy shop for a digital download of a Google Sheets template. But some things you want to think about are the all-in cost of a wedding. So getting ready, your wedding dress, if you have a groom, your groom's suit, your partner's attire. If you want to do a second dress, what's that going to look like? Alterations costs, hair and makeup, accessories, shoes, bags, anything, food for when you're getting ready before the wedding, your vendors, so photo, video, photo booth if you're doing that, lighting, rentals, transportation, where you're staying the night of your wedding, a day of coordinator. Most venues now are requiring them, and I really would recommend them. So what does that look like? Are you going to tip them? Make sure you include that. Your ceremony venue rental fee, any rentals that you need for chairs and fans and what have you for the ceremony, officiant fees, if you have any programs, signs to have at your ceremony. If you're going to do water or champagne at your ceremony, have that in your budget. Your reception venue fee, your cocktail hour appetizers, your cocktail hour music, your music at your ceremony, I forgot that. Music at your reception, your food at your reception, your bar and bartenders, if you're going to do late night food, if you're going to do any rentals at your reception, favors, decor, florals. If you're going to do a rehearsal dinner, what does your catering look like for that? What's your venue fee, rentals? Are you going to have music or a DJ? Are you going to do any welcome bags for your welcome party? Are you going to have appetizers? Are you going to have drinks, bar package? Are you going to have a venue for that? Any rentals? Are you going to, have any entertainment for your guests? If you're going to do a farewell breakfast the day after your wedding, what does that look like? So this is like an all-in, like in the spreadsheet that I created, I threw in like everything I could possibly think of for your wedding or anyone's wedding. And if there are certain things you're not doing, like not everyone does a welcome party, you don't need to do one. So you could just delete those off of the spreadsheet template. You want to think about lodging. If you have pets, who's watching your pets? If you're doing, bridesmaid proposals, you want to do that. Bachelorette party costs. You want to budget for everything to get your all-in costs. So check out my budget spreadsheet down below, but hopefully this video gave you some things to initially think about to create your first budget, your first draft of your budget. I'm going to talk in future videos about how I have readdressed my budget. I have gone back to my budget and made edits many a time. I've also forgotten a lot of things. So the videos I make in 2025 might include even more things than I'm listing today, but I do think this will give you, your first budget doesn't have to be perfect, but it does have to be pretty all-encompassing if budget is going to be tight. So that's why I recommend you pick a conservative number for how much you can contribute. That way, if you forgot a few things that are important to you, you maybe have some wiggle room for things in the future. I hope that gives you some things to think about. I hope this video is helpful. Please let me know down below if it is. Let me know what other topics you want to hear as part of the wedding series. The next video, I'll be talking about selecting and booking my venue and things that you can do to select and book your own venue, as well as the initial design and theme of my wedding and just things you can be doing to think about what you want to do for your wedding. So thank you so much for being here on my channel and for being part of our community. Subscribe if you're not already, and I'll catch you in my next one.